I don't want to run over the hour, and sometimes I tend to do that. So he already did. Good. Welcome everybody to the Azure Brown Bag. Hopefully, we talk about a couple of things that you don't know. A lot of this is kind of introductory, just kind of giving an overview of the things that Azure provides. But hopefully there's some stuff in there that you can learn. And if I do anything wrong or say anything wrong, correct me. That way I can blacklist you and never talk to you again. So what we're going to talk about is the Azure Cloud, the Azure Cloud Platform. Azure is Microsoft's version of AWS, right? AWS is obviously the big one, but Azure is Microsoft's version of that. Oh, first of all, let me tell you who I am. If anybody here doesn't know me, and I think everybody does, that's me right there. Any questions? Okay. So I'm the .NET Practice Manager here at STG. I've been a developer for longer than most of you have been alive. I have 3 kids, a granddaughter, and a Jeep. I actually have a Jeep, 3 kids, and a Jeep, a granddaughter, and 3 kids. That's the order it should go in. So what we're going to do today, first of all, we're just going to talk a little about what Azure is. And we're going to talk about how to pronounce Azure. So there's a lot of misconceptions in the industry today that it's pronounced Azure. It's not pronounced Azure, okay? It's Azure. And we're not from Australia, so we can't call it Azure. We're going to talk about what you can do with Azure and how it can make you a better person. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to use Azure and .NET as well, because Azure and .NET are very tightly coupled. I mean, if you use Visual Studio, you can develop for Azure, deploy to Azure, do everything you want in Azure without actually going into Azure. And so it makes it super easy. It's a very low friction way to use the cloud. And then we've got some demos and some Q&A. So first of all, what is Azure? Well, it's Microsoft's cloud computing platform. It's the second largest one after AWS. And AWS is actually quite a bit larger. It's about 1/3 again as large as Azure. Right now, there's a big DoD contract going out for cloud services, $10 billion worth. And it's kind of between Microsoft and AWS right now. And hopefully Microsoft gets it because Microsoft could really use a cash infusion there. They're not quite at that $1 trillion mark, so that could really help them out. But Azure does actually have more data centers than AWS does. It's in 140 countries in 42 different regions, more regions than any other. And one thing that Azure excels in is it have a hybrid solution. So with Azure, you can run stuff in the cloud and stuff on-prem, and you can run them concurrently and seamlessly, really easily. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about Azure Stack here in a minute. So here's all of the Azure regions. You can see there's a lot of them. We're just going to skip through some of this. Has anybody heard of Project Matic? So Project Matic is something that's really cool that Microsoft did. That right there is an Azure data center. And what happens a lot of times in data centers is that you have a lot of servers. And what happens when you have a lot of servers? You get a lot of heat, right? So that's the big problem with these Azure data centers, or any big data center, is siphoning off that heat. And so I don't know why they put the one down in the desert down there, but that seems a little wrong to me. But anyway, so one of the things that Microsoft came up with is, hey, where is a place that's cold all the time? The bottom of the ocean. So they decided to build this submersible data center, and they sunk it down on the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Scotland. They have a big cable, I don't know, probably pretty thick, hooked up to it. It's down on the bottom of the ocean. It uses the ocean for cooling. So it helps to keep the data center cool, and it also pre-cooks the fish that the fishermen pull out of the sea. So it kind of is a win-win for everybody on that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about hybrid. What is hybrid cloud? So hybrid is the ability to run stuff in the cloud and stuff on-prem. Now, ideally, everybody moves everything to the cloud and doesn't worry about on-prem anymore, right? That's a perfect world. But that's definitely not going to happen. There's a lot of companies out there that don't want to move to the cloud at all, or don't want to move everything to the cloud. And I kind of have a little difference of opinion on a lot of that stuff. A lot of people don't want to move to the cloud because they're afraid it's not as secure, or that their data is going to be exposed. And my answer is always, well, look, in Azure or any of the others, you've got a team of dedicated security professionals whose entire job is to keep your data safe. And you're telling me that you can do a better job with your on-prem servers. I don't think that's the case, but it's a hard thing to get across. The way that hybrid works, like for one of the things you can do hybrid is Active Directory. So you can have Azure Active Directory, you can have your on-prem Active Directory, and you can keep them synced up so that you can log in with your on-prem servers with the same user ID that you use to log into your Azure accounts. And so we also have Azure Data Services, and we have Azure Stack. And we're going to talk a little bit about Azure Stack. Azure Stack is this really cool thing that Microsoft came out with that essentially allows you to install Azure on-prem. What that means is that you'll have all of the same services, the same interface, the same everything that you do when you go to your Azure portal out of the cloud. Okay, so you go to your Azure portal, and we'll look at the Azure portal here in a minute. You go to the Azure portal, and you have, it does the blades, is what it's called. They do blades to show everything that's in there. With Azure Stack, you can open up an Azure portal that has blades for your cloud stuff and blades for your on-prem stuff all in the same portal. So it's a seamless management interface, which really makes it easy to do hybrid solutions. Now, I was thinking to myself, you know what? I'm going to grab an old computer that I have sitting around. I'm going to install Azure Stack just so I can get familiar with it and play with it a little bit. And so I went and started looking at the Azure Stack hardware requirements. Okay, so the minimum hardware requirements is a disk with 200 gig of space. Not a problem, right? And then I need 4 separate disks, each with 140 gig capacity. Okay, I can still do that. That's okay. Dual socket, 12 physical cores on the CPU. Okay, it's getting a little more difficult now. My laptop only has 1 socket and like 2 cores. So that was a problem. The next one, 96 gigabytes of RAM. And it was right there that I just stopped reading because I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. My laptop just doesn't have enough div slots for 96 gig. And then the recommended is actually 128 gigabytes of RAM. So I guess the point here is that Azure Stack is not for the casual company that's just looking to screw around with it. Right? Azure Stack is a pretty serious piece of software, and you're essentially running Azure on-prem with Azure Stack. So it's a solution, it's an option, but I've never used it, and that would be why right there. All right, so what's one of the big advantages of the cloud, right? Hold on. Sorry about that. What's one of the big advantages of the cloud? So we can put VMs up in the cloud all day long, right? Virtual machines. That's one of the things that you can do in the cloud. And that's one thing that AWS does a lot of, is virtual machines. Everything's virtual machines. Virtual machines are great, and that's a really low friction way of getting up into the cloud. But there's definitely better ways to do it. If you have the luxury of being able to architect a new solution or re-architect an existing solution, then the better way to go would be to go the serverless route. Now, what's one advantage of going serverless? Does anybody know? No more maintenance patching. Spin up time, okay? So when you put a VM anywhere, right? I mean, VM on-prem, VM in the cloud, the benefits of a VM is that you control the whole machine, you control the licensing, and you have full control over that VM, right? The downside of having a VM in the cloud is you have to control the whole machine, you have to deal with licensing, and you just have to control the whole thing. So the upsides are the same as the downsides with VMs. Now, there's some things that you have to use VMs for, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But for the most part, you want to go serverless. If you publish a website up into one of their app services, you never have to worry about patching that. There's no patching involved. There's no licensing involved. You don't have to worry about a Windows license. You don't have to worry about an IIS license. Not that there is such a thing, but if there was, you wouldn't have to worry about it. Because everything's taken care of behind the scenes. It's a platform as a service, and it's all taken care of for you behind the scenes. Okay, so let's look at what Azure can do. So what can you do in Azure? Well, you can do virtual machines, you can do app services, you can do SQL databases. There's actually a couple of ways to do SQL Server databases. There's Azure SQL, and there's a new one that is either just coming out of preview or is out of preview. It's called Managed Instance. We'll talk a little bit about that. Cognitive services, those are awesome. We'll talk a little bit about those. And all kinds of stuff. The IoT hub. So you can see I got some wood over here. I have this really cool demo that I forgot my Arduino. So it was for the IoT hub, and I can't even show the demo. I feel really bad, but that's too bad. Azure Active Directory, virtual networks. You can actually set up an entire network infrastructure inside of Azure. In fact, when UTA first set up their Azure account, their plan was to mirror their on-prem servers, VMs and everything, up in Azure. We had a discussion, talk about that's a bad idea, but they'd actually built virtual networks and all kinds of stuff up in Azure. And then we deleted them all because they didn't need it anymore. So that's only some of the stuff. So these are really everything that Azure can do. You can see there's a lot. And in fact, let's really quickly take a look at an Azure portal. So this is our Azure portal for the project that I'm working on at UTA. And we'll come back to this in a minute. But if you go look at all services here, these are all of the services that Azure provides. I mean, there's tons of them in here. And this is actually a government account. So there's different types of Azure. We have Azure Commercial and we have Azure Government. Azure Government has about half the number of services that Azure Commercial does. And so you can see this huge list of services. Azure Commercial has about twice that. And the reason is because in order to get into Azure Commercial, you have to meet a lot more stringent requirements than you do with Azure Government, which is really frustrating because for the UTA project that I'm working on, we're using Azure Government, and there's a lot of things that we simply don't have that I really want to use, and so I just have to figure out workarounds. All right, let's go back to the slideshow. Okay. So what we're going to do really quickly, do we have any questions before we start getting into the demos and whatnot? No? Okay. So we're going to go look at a couple of different things. We're going to take a quick look at virtual machine. I'm not going to focus too much on virtual machines because I think the virtual machines are a really good way to lift and shift into the cloud, but I don't think that they're a good long-term solution for most things. Again, there are some things where you may have to use a virtual machine, but if you have the luxury of re-architecting, I would say don't do it in virtual machines. They're more expensive, they're heavier, they're a little harder to scale, and so they're just not quite as good. So we're going to look at app services. We're going to look at how to scale app services. We're going to look at Azure SQL, cognitive services, and you guys can read as well as I can. So that's what we're going to look at, all right? So first of all, let's just take a quick peek at virtual machines. So virtual machines, again, like we talked about, you control the whole environment, which is a plus, but you control the whole environment, which is a bad thing. So unless you absolutely need VM, now you can put a Windows VM up there with IIS, and you can run your website inside of a Windows VM with IIS, and it'll work just fine. The problem is that then you're paying for all the overhead of a VM. You don't have the really easy scale up and down capabilities, and it's just a lot heavier than it needs to be. Now, if you're running a VB6 app, yeah, you might need to do it in a VM. And I apologize about that. But all right, so exactly, and then you deserve what you get. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I hear it. All right, let's. So this is the Azure portal. So we're just going to create a quick VM. This is the Azure portal, and you can see that. Let's see, is this running? I think it is. Oh yeah, it's running. So just so you know, this is a video. It's a pre-recorded so that I don't have any problems like that. Well, anyway. So you can see all the different things we have in our Azure portal. We have tons of different options, and these are only the ones that I have started. These are my favorites. And so you can go into that big list we saw earlier and mark any of them as favorites, and then they'll show up here. We're going to go in the big way, and we're going to create a virtual machine. So you select virtual machine, and you can see we don't have any virtual machines yet. So all we need to do is we're going to need to click on Add, and then we can pick from tons of different types of. We have Windows, we have Linux, we have different types of Linux and other kinds of Linux and lots of kinds of Linux. And we have lots of types of Windows too. You can see all these Windows servers that we have. We have Windows servers that are set up with Windows Server Data Center. We have Windows servers that are set up with SQL Server already installed and configured. And so you can look at all the different types of Windows servers that we have. They even have Windows Server Core. If you're familiar with that, it's like a watered down version of SQL Server for if you want to do a headless type of installation. But anyway, so we're gonna pick just a Windows server. You give it a name, and then you have to pick what type of disk you want to use for the main disk. If you're going to be doing something that requires a lot of intensive I/O, then you're probably going to want to use an SSD. If not, then a regular hard drive is probably fine for that. You have to give it an administrator username and password. So this is so that you can log into the machine. Because once you get this machine built, you can just RDP into it like you can with any other virtual machine. It is actually a normal virtual machine. We're going to pick our subscription. I've only got the one here. We're going to pick a resource group. Now, resource groups are a way that you can organize and keep track of all of the resources in Azure. What happens is you get a lot of resources in Azure. You got 10 databases, 50 app services, some functions, some runbooks, some Cosmos DB, whatever. You got tons and hundreds of services. They get really hard to manage in your dashboard. They're just a big long list. So by putting them all into resource groups, it gives you a way to organize them and kind of group things together so that you can find things more easily. So we're going to have a STG brown bag resource group, and then we're going to go to the next step. Now the next step is we have to pick how powerful we want this virtual machine to be. And there's a lot of different options. It only shows 3 there, but if we do view all, you can see that there's a ton of different ways that you can set up this virtual machine. How many cores do you want? How much hard drive space do you want? Do you want built-in load balancing? Do you want premium disks? Just tons of stuff. So you can see here, it also shows the price. And you see that $1,237? That is per month. So if you want a machine like that, you better be dang sure that you need that much resources, because I don't want to spend $1,200 a month. I guess if you need it, though, it's worth it. So there's a ton of different options here. I like to pick the $10 a month one, because for a demo, that's really all it needs to be. So then there's a couple more options you can pick. You can change the networking information, and most of this stuff I just don't worry about. There is one option here called auto shutdown. So if you're just using this for testing or for just once in a while thing, you can have it auto shut down, and you can set a time. I want this auto shut down at 7 o'clock every night. What that does is that, well, it shuts it down at 7 o'clock every night, and then it doesn't charge you for the virtual machine at that point. You only get charged while the virtual machine is running. So that's a way to save some money. Okay, so it's going to give us a little summary, make sure we know what we're doing. So you see, this is going to cost 1.3 cents per hour to run this virtual machine. So that's not too bad. I can probably afford that. But that's only per hour while it's running, which is why you do the auto shutdown. So we're going to hit create. Now, through the magic of Adobe, whatever, I can't remember what I used to edit this video, this is actually going to take a lot less time than it does in real life. When you create a VM in real life, it actually takes quite a while, about 5, almost 8 minutes to create that virtual machine. But here we're just going to see it pop up in a second there. See, that was pretty quick. That's not how it is in real life. And there you can see we have our virtual machine. So now we can RDP into this virtual machine as if it were just okay. All right, so we've talked enough about virtual machines. Let's move on. Any questions on virtual machines? No? Okay. All right. Let's talk about app services. So app services are a better way to do if you want websites. So rather than a virtual machine with IIS, you can use app services. And app services are just a lightweight. I almost like to equate them to Docker containers. And that probably irritates Docker people, but they're kind of the same type of thing, right? You have this single instance of an app service, and its purpose is only to run your website or your web API or whatever you put in. That's all it does. And it's small, it's lightweight, it doesn't have all of the crap that you have in a virtual machine. And the servers are managed, so you don't have to worry about the servers. They're just taken care of. You don't even know what servers they're on. I assume they're on a server somewhere, but they don't tell me those things. So let's do a quick demo on this. So we're going to show how to create and deploy an app service from within Visual Studio. Okay. So let's see, did that start it? I can never, there's no play button on here. It's really irritating. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything, does it? Oh no, that went to the next one. That's what we're talking about next. But, okay. Now I've done this 100 times. There, I clicked it. Does it do anything? Yeah, exactly. Okay, this is just really embarrassing. It's supposed to start on click, but it's not going to, is it? Okay, well that's unfortunate. That's not what I wanted. Okay, you know what? I'm going to do this here. We'll just play it in here instead. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, so what we're going to do, so this is Azure DevOps. Does everybody know what Azure DevOps is? So Azure DevOps is Microsoft's, it used to be called Visual Studio Team Services. They changed the name of it a couple weeks ago to Azure DevOps. So all of my videos are Visual Studio Team Services, but it's the same thing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into Azure DevOps, and we're going to just create an empty Git repo in Azure DevOps, and then we're going to clone that Git repo into Visual Studio, okay, just so that we can get an empty project. We want to start out clean. We're going to create a whole new empty project. So we're going to go into Visual Studio, thusly, and we're going to clone that repo down to our Visual Studio. I might make this full screen at least. Okay, well anyway, sorry if that's hard to see. I'm a developer, not a PowerPoint engineer. Okay, I don't know. So it's really easy to clone in Visual Studio if you're using Azure DevOps. Even if you're using Git, it's really easy to clone a repo. We're just cloning an empty repo. And then we can go click on our Team Explorer here, and we can do project or solution in this repository. So we're just going to click on that, and we're going to create an ASP.NET Core web application. Okay, and we're going to name it STG Brown Bag. And put it in that location. So again, what I've done is I've gone to Azure DevOps, I created an empty repo, and then I just cloned that repo. So then these are the same steps you go through. I mean, we're just creating a website, right? A .NET Core web application. So it's going to go ahead and create that. Let's see, what's this do? Hide it. Oh, there we go. That's a little better, right? Okay. So now we have our ASP.NET Core website. So let's go see if it actually did it. We're going to just run this. Now what happens when you just run from within Visual Studio? Brings it up in localhost, right? So it should bring it up in localhost if everything works. And this is a pre-recording. Did I say that? So I know it's not working. So there we go. We have our localhost, and there's our beautiful ASP.NET Core website. That's a lot of code for just a couple of clicks. It's not useful code, but it's a lot of code. So let's go back, and we're going to go back into here. And what we want to do is we want to publish this website up to Azure. Now in Azure right now, we have nothing. We don't have any app services defined. We don't have any VMs. We've got nothing. We just have a blank Azure portal. But we want to publish this up into Azure. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. You could go in and you can, just a second. You could go in and you can create your Azure service and all that up in the Azure portal. But we're going to do it the easy way. So we're going to go into right-click publish. So everybody knows how to right-click publish. We're going to go to right-click publish, and we're going to pick app service. Now, when you do an app service, you have an option to create new or select existing. We're going to create new. If you already have one up there, you can select existing, and it'll publish it into an existing app service. We're going to create new. and then we're going to hit publish. Now what it's going to do is it's going to make us pick our subscription up in the upper right if you have multiple subscriptions. And then we need to give our app a name. It gives it a default name, but I wouldn't recommend using the default unless you really like to irritate your users. So I'm going to change that to just STG Brown Bag Web App, because what happens is your app name becomes the host name of your website. So in other words, this is going to become STG Brown Bag Web App.azurewebsites.net. Okay. You give it your subscription. You pick the resource group that you want to use. Remember, we talked about resource groups a minute ago. I've got a ton of them in here. So we're going to notice that we don't have one for the STG Brown Bag. We want a special resource group for STG Brown Bag. So we're going to go create a new one. We're going to give it a new one, STG Azure Brown Bag. And then we pick our hosting plan. The hosting plan is just a definition of what kind of resources you're going to use and what data center you're going to put it in, things like that. So now you can see all we have to do is we hit create, and then it's going to go do that. Now again, this takes a minute or two, because what it's doing right now is it's actually going out to your Azure portal. It's creating all of these services that you asked for, and then it's going to publish our website into said services. So you can see it's swirling around a little bit there. This takes just a second to go through. And then there we have it. And then it's going to take us, now you can see our URL now is stgbrownbagwebapp.azurewebsites.net. So that is the actual website up on Azure, and you can see that it works just fine. So all we had to do is we had to go into Visual Studio. It created everything in the Azure portal for us. We didn't even have to go into our Azure portal. All we had to know is our login information. That is important. You do need to know that. That way other people don't publish stuff, which is really not what you want. So you can see this is our beautiful website. Now, if we go back to our Azure portal, so this again is at our Azure portal. If we hit refresh, now we've got that STG Brown Bag resource group. If we click on that, oh, sorry, that's our STG Brown Bag. Hey, that's our resource group. And then you can see over there we have our STG Brown Bag web app. That's an app service that was created for us. So if we go into that, you can see that there's going to be a lot of different options in here. So one of the things I wanted to mention, I don't usually talk about this at this stage, but I did want to mention something about deployment slots. Does anybody know what deployment slots are? Okay. Deployment slots are a way that you can easily deploy to different stages of your application. So for instance, we have our STG web app application, right? But typically, when you're building applications for clients, you usually don't go straight from Visual Studio to production, right? Okay, you shouldn't. You shouldn't go straight from Visual Studio to production, right? Now, sometimes, if you can sneak something through, you might do that. But what deployment slots do is they make it really easy for you to obey the multi-tiered system of QA, staging, UAT, whatever you want to do. So for instance, in this particular app service, we could go in there and we could set up deployment slots. So we could go and set up a staging deployment slot, a QA deployment slot, a UAT deployment slot, and then we've got our main site here, which is this one. So that's the production site. So then what you do is you go into Visual Studio and you're going to publish from Visual Studio into the staging deployment slot, okay? It's everything the same. So the only difference is that when you go to the URL, it's going to be stgbrownbagwebapp-staging.azurewebsites.net. Okay? So it's going to add a dash in the name of the deployment slot on the end of the URL. Okay, now you're thinking, okay, so what's the big deal with that? Then what you can do is if you have things in your staging slot and you're comfortable with it, everything's working, you can go in and you can swap the slots. So you can swap staging with QA, for instance. So what that does is that takes everything that's in staging, puts it into QA, and everything in QA and moves it to staging. So then all your stuff is in QA that you want QA to start testing. Okay? Now QA goes through and they find some major problems. Everything's broken. All you need to do is swap that back, and you're right back to where QA was before you messed them up. Unless you push into staging again. You do have to be a little careful with that. But then what you do is you can swap that all the way up the line. So you swap it into UAT, the users come and say, hey, everything's working great. Then you swap it into production. Now, if you break something into production, which they probably will notice pretty quickly, then you just swap it right back. You're back to where production was, and you're not having to worry about rollback procedures and any of that stuff. And it makes it really easy to make sure that you're not breaking your users' stuff. Okay. So that's exactly right. So within the deployment slot, you're going to be setting environment variables and connection strings and whatnot that are specific to that deployment slot, right? Because if you're running your website in staging, you're probably, well, you shouldn't be running against the production database, right? You're going to be running against the staging database or a QA database. And so you set up those connection strings and environment variables inside the slot. And then when you swap the slots, you get all the code exactly as it was in your slot with the settings that apply to that slot. Does that make sense? So it's really cool. That way, when you have to revert back, you're not having to worry about any configuration management at all. All the configurations stay with the slot, and the code is what moves. Okay. Very cool stuff. All right, let me see if I'm smart enough to figure out how to run this again. Let's move this. Okay, apparently not. Let me drag this over to here, and we'll try to run this again. Okay. All right. So one of the things I really love about app services is the way that they can scale. So there's essentially two types of scaling that you can do with an app service, and this applies to a lot of different things inside of Azure. Scale up or you can scale out. Now, scaling up means you're essentially throwing more hardware, throwing more resources at a web service. So imagine, you're running your website on your laptop. Well, your laptop's getting pounded; it can't handle it anymore, so you have to take that and move it over to a gaming laptop. And then that's not working, so you have to move it over to a big server. Okay, that's scaling up. You're throwing it on bigger and bigger hardware. And that works really well if you know how much hardware you're going to need and you're going to keep it on there for a while, right? Because you can't auto scale up. Okay, so there's another option called scale out. And what scale out does is it'll take your app service, and let's say you're a retailer and your busy time is around July 4th, right? Or wait, no. Busy time is around Christmas, right? So what you have to do is if you host everything on-prem, you're going to have to buy monster servers that can handle all your Christmas traffic. And then what happens after January 15th, after everybody's returned everything? You don't need that much hardware anymore. So you pay for these massive servers that are sitting there, twiddling their thumbs, being bored all the time. What scaling out allows you to do is it allows you to say, okay, I'm going to put this website up in Azure. And when it starts getting really busy, it's going to automatically spawn off new instances of my website, and it's going to automatically load balance between them. So as your website gets really busy, Azure's going to say, oh, this thing's over whatever threshold you specify. I'm going to spawn off a new one. So it spawns off a new one, load balances between them, and then you have two things running your site. And then when those get busy, it's going to spawn off another one. It's going to spawn off another one. And then when it gets less busy again, it's going to start kicking them off. So you go from 5, 4, 3. So what that means is that you only pay for the resources that you need for your traffic. The great thing about that is that if you're getting a lot of traffic, hopefully that translates into a lot of money, so you can afford to pay a little bit more for your hardware. But when you're not getting a lot of traffic, you only pay for the little. Yes. Well, so yeah, I mean, it's the same app, so everything's pointing to the same place. So it would keep the same SQL server. Now you could set it up to do maybe into a Redis cache or something as a backplane, but yeah, it uses the same SQL server. But SQL Server, you can also scale up. You can't scale out a SQL Server, but you can definitely scale up, and we'll look at that if we get a chance. Any questions about scaling? Let's take a look and see how hard it is to scale. Yes, absolutely.
In my experience, at least, I've had a couple of clients that when it comes to implementing Azure, like that is the biggest design factor? Service cost.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. You need to be really careful with Azure. It is super easy to go overboard on Azure expenses. We have a client down south, GPS, I don't know if anybody knows them anyway. They moved their entire infrastructure up to Azure, and he turned something on that he forgot about, and they had an $8,000 bill that month for their Azure, which is way more than they had budgeted for. So you got to be really careful. If you're turning things on and jacking things up, it could get out of control if you don't pay attention. And Azure doesn't like refunding money for some reason, I don't know. So that's something to be very, very, very careful. Because as it does scale out, so if it scales out to 2 instances, you're paying for 2 instances. If it scales out to 3, I mean, you're paying for however many instances you're scaling out to. Which is why it's nice when it scales back down, because then you're not paying. All right, so look at this. I found out you can click a play button right here. That's pretty handy. The more you know. Oh, or not. Wait a second. Let me try that again. There we go. All right, so we're just going to really quickly see how to scale this out. So, so this is our web app that we've created, and you can see there's a lot of things that we can do over the side. So here's the deployment slots right here. Okay. So that's how we set up new deployment slots. We can also set up web jobs in here. Web jobs are a really good way to do continuously running tasks or triggered tasks. But we have these 2 options here, scale up and scale out. So you remember when we set this up, well, we didn't look at that, but we set it up on the cheapest plan. And there is actually a free plan for app services. It's shared resources, so you're essentially sharing your app resources with everybody else in Azure. Not a really great decision if you're going to be doing production loads, but you can do that if you want. So we're going to look at scaling up first. Okay, so scale up and scale out. Okay, so we're going to click on scale up, and you can see what it does is it shows you all of the same kinds of things that we saw with the virtual machines. It just gives you a bunch of different options on how powerful you want this thing to be. And the thing to remember is the bigger scale up you pick is the same scale that it's going to use for all your scale outs. So here where we have $892 a month on that one up there, if you get 2 of those, that's a lot of money. But there you see we have our free service. The free service, as you can see, it doesn't have a lot of stuff that you can do with it. So it doesn't let you do auto scaling at all. And it doesn't even let you do manual scaling. If you're on the free service, you get 1 instance and that's all you're ever going to get. Now, if you go up to the basic, you get to the point where you see down there we had the ability to do manual scaling. So you can go and scale it up manually. It's totally lame. You want auto scaling, which is why we're going to pick this one for a minute, because we want to auto scale this sucker. So it's $45 a month. Yeah, it's not cheap, but we get 1 core, 1.75 gig of RAM, and that doesn't sound like a lot, right? 1.75 gigabytes of RAM. My watch has more than that. But the thing to remember is that in this slot, the only thing that's running on that 1.75 gigabytes of RAM is your app. It's not having to run the whole OS and all that stuff that your other machines do. So that is dedicated to your app. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and pick the S1 standard option here, which was already picked, so we're not moving. So now let's go to scale out. So scale out is the one that I really like. It's the one that I think is cool. And this allows you to be a little bit more elastic in how many resources you use and what you set up for. So you can see that we have this screen come up. And we can set a number of instances that we want to run. Now, this is manual scaling. That slider right there is manual scaling. That means we're setting up, we want to run 5 instances. We want to run 6 instances all the time, no matter what. Which I guess there's a use case for that. Obviously, there is, or they wouldn't have put it in here. But in my opinion, I think if you can do auto scaling, you're probably going to be better off. So we can do auto scaling. Let's skip forward a little bit and get to the auto scaling. So there's that button there to enable auto scaling. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and enable auto scaling. Now, when we set up auto scaling, we have to tell Azure how we want to scale that thing. What thresholds do we want that to scale? So we're going to scale based on a metric. And what that means is that we can scale it based on CPU percentage. We can scale it based on hard drive I/O. We can scale it based on network traffic. So whatever our website uses the most of, we can scale based on those metrics. So we're going to scale, and what we have to do is we have to add a rule. So we're going to go add a scaling rule. And you can see, I'm going to come over here. So we're going to base this on average, and we're going to base ours on CPU percentage. You can see there's a whole bunch of different things here. Memory percentage, disk queue, HTTP queue, different things like that. We're going to base ours off of CPU percentage. So we're going to base it on an average where greater than 70% for 10 minutes. So what we're saying here is if the CPU percentage hits 70% or higher for 10 minutes, that means we need to scale up. So then we're going to come in here, we're going to increase our count by 1 with a cooldown of 5 minutes. So it won't check again for 5 minutes. We don't want to be popping these things up really fast if there's just a momentary spike in network traffic, right? Or CPU percentage. So we're going to increase the count by 1. We can make that increase by 2, increase by 10, whatever you want to do. So we're going to increase by 1. And then when we go ahead and add that, so what's going to happen now if I stop here? Anybody know? As it starts using CPU, what's going to happen?
It'll start spawning new ones, deliver, go down.
Yeah. So it'll get up to 5 and it'll stay at 5 forever, right? Which for the first little time was really cool, but then it kind of gets lame because the whole point is to scale it back down, right? So what we need to do now is we need to add another rule to tell it how we want it to scale back down. So we're going to say if the CPU percentage gets less than 20% for 10 minutes on any one of them, then we're going to decrease count by 1. So then as the CPU usage goes back down again, it's going to decrease. Now when you take one away, the CPU utilization of them should go up, right? Because there's 4 handling all the traffic rather than 5. And now once those go back down again, it'll get rid of another, get rid of another. And so that's how you can make it scale up and then back down again.
When it decides to go up, how long before it's actually ready to apply?
It happens very quickly, within 30 seconds. And you don't even notice, unless you read your emails, if you haven't set up to send you. I mean, it does notify you, but it's all done in the background. And if we get time, we can go look at the portal that I have and see if we have any instances of it scaling up and down. So here's where you're going to set the minimum and maximum. So you wanted a maximum of 10. It'll never go over 10. If you're pegged at 100% for an hour and you already have 10, it's just going to be pegged at 100%. And where we scaled up is where we determine how many maximum instances we can have. So the more expensive scale up you have, the more maximum instances you get. And I think the most expensive one still only allows 20 instances. And so that's
That was something I was going to ask you about. That's something there are a lot of gotchas that go on with the right side of the model. There's one where we picked an instance size, they found out sort of halfway through like, oh, this particular one can't access the global network. Like it's only inside Azure.
Yes. And that brings up another good point is that different data centers actually have different capabilities. So if you set all of your resources in like US Southwest, for instance, it may not have certain resources that another data center would. So you have to keep that in mind. In fact, at UTA, we have all of our stuff hosted on the US Government Arizona data center. The problem with the US Government Arizona data center is it does not support autoscale, which we found out after I went and tried to set up autoscale. So for our app, it doesn't really matter. We don't need it, but I just was going to play around with it. So there are some considerations, and you can go online and find out what data centers have what stuff. But typically, the newer services that come out, number one, they're not going to be in Azure Government. And number two, they're only going to be probably in the main data centers in the United States first. And then they'll start moving out. The base services are available everywhere. You got your app services, your Azure SQL. Cosmos DB, I don't think is available everywhere, but it's almost. Yeah, so, you know, there's some things to be cognizant of there. Any other questions? All right, let's move into SQL Azure, and we are just not going to have time to get through everything, unfortunately. So SQL Azure, that is Azure's implementation of SQL Server, right? Now, it's very close to 100% feature parity with on-prem SQL Server, but it's not 100% feature parity. There are some differences between the two. So if you're doing a migration from on-prem SQL Server to Azure SQL, there's some things that you need to be aware of. First of all, and this is probably the biggest one, it doesn't support linked servers. So if you have databases that have linked servers, Azure SQL will not support that. So you need to either re-architect that or use a SQL managed instance or put it into VMs in Azure. Because if you have it in VMs in Azure, you install regular SQL Server and do it. Now, let's say you do want to upgrade your or move your on-prem SQL Server into Azure. How do you know if it's going to work or not? Well, Microsoft has this tool called the Data Migration Assistant. And what that does is that takes your database, it looks through everything, and it'll tell you if it's going to be able to be put up there or not. There was a client that we had, Keep Technology, that we had to take their SQL Server and we had to migrate it up into Azure, and it would just not go. So I ran it through this data migration assistant, and it had all kinds of problems. I mean, it was doing linked servers, it was doing, and the thing is so when you want to move a database from one SQL Server to another, you know, the easy way to do it is do a backup, take that file over and restore it in the database, right? Really easy. That's not how Azure SQL works. Azure SQL doesn't do BAK files like you think Azure or on-prem SQL does. It creates what's called a backpack file. And it contains all the data, but then it contains scripts to build the objects, okay? So when you put that into Azure, it's going to run the scripts to build the objects and then load the data. The problem with that, and with this Keep Technology one, is they had stored procedures that reference tables that didn't exist anymore, reference fields that didn't exist anymore. And SQL Server, that's fine, because it was fine when it was created the first time, and it never goes back and rechecks stored procedures to make sure they're okay, right? So they're in the database, they're fine, they probably don't get used anymore, they're just old crap that got left behind. But when you go to put that into Azure SQL, it goes through and runs all those scripts, and if any of them break, it won't let you put the database into Azure SQL. So you have to make sure your database is clean, make sure that it works, make sure that it builds, and all of that stuff before you put it in Azure SQL.
Yeah, backpacks were ordinarily intolerant of
Very strict.
yeah.
Very strict, yes, absolutely.
In fact, I would say any mixed environment where you have existing databases that are outside of your application database
it could cause problems. We eventually did get the Keep one to work, but it took some effort to do that. So now you can actually take a backpack file and put it into on-prem SQL Server as well. I don't know if you've ever looked in SQL Server Management Studio, but you can right-click and you can say import data tier application. It's a data tier application. So if you ever see data tier application, that's what a backpack file is. So you can take a backpack file from Azure SQL and you can import it into on-prem SQL Server. That works really well. And that's, I mean, there's no problem with that. It's going the other way. So a couple of the cool things that we have in SQL Azure is we have auto-tuning. This is one of my favorite things. And I like to tease the DBAs at UTA a lot, tell them that now we have SQL Azure, we don't need DBAs because it does it all for you. They don't laugh like I do, but so auto-tuning. Auto-tuning is a thing that, have you ever used the SQL performance profiler in on-prem SQL Server? Okay. It tells you, okay, this query, add these indexes and it'll prove it by this much, right? So then you go and you say, okay, do it, or auto-tuning does all of that for you behind the scenes. So Azure SQL will constantly monitor your workload, and as it notices things that can be improved, it will automatically apply indexes, and it'll even remove indexes if they haven't been used after whatever period of time. So what that means is that you don't have to be so concerned about optimizing your database for your workload, because even if your workload changes, Azure SQL is constantly monitoring that, and it will continually make changes. We actually, at UTA, we started doing some new operations, and I went in and looked, and that next day we had some new indexes that it generated. And it'll show you the stats on how much it saved. If it made any queries slower, it'll tell you all of that information. And what's interesting is, if you go look at the stats, it'll show you which indexes it did, and then sometimes it'll revert them back. Because after doing it and watching the workload, it notices that it broke something else or whatever, so it'll revert it back. So it kind of keeps track of all of that for you. You don't have to worry about that anymore.
Are the names of what puts in the statistics actually beautiful?
They are really cool names, like long numbers, and I mean, it looks like the last 10 digits of pi or something. But yeah, they're not friendly names. But at that point, you don't really care either so much, right? Because at that point, you're in production, and it's just going to keep it up. So another cool thing that it provides is encryption at rest. What does that mean? Well, that means that it automatically encrypts all of your data as it sits on the hard drive. Because even though we're in the cloud, everything's still sitting on hard drive, right? So encryption at rest, and these are all options, by the way. You can turn these on or off. You don't have to have it. But what encryption at rest means is that if somebody snuck into the Azure data center and pulled a hard drive, took it home and plugged it in, and all of your data is going to be encrypted, and they can't get it anymore. And it all does it seamlessly. So as you save data to the database, as you bring data back out, it encrypts it and de-encrypts it. You don't even notice that it's happening. And I haven't even noticed a performance hit on encryption at rest. So that's kind of cool.
So you were Azure and you query. Are you seeing the data when you query it, or is it all encrypted?
Nope, that's what I'm saying. As you query the data out, it decrypts it before it gives it. So the encryption is down on the hardware level, and it abstracts it away from you. So you don't even know that it's not SQL encryption. It's Azure SQL encryption. Or whatever that is. Something. But it works. Well, actually, I don't know if it works. I've never gotten down to the hardware and checked it, but I'm going to trust it.
Isn't this enabled by default encryption at rest?
It is.
I think you have to explicitly.
You can turn it off, though. Yep. Another cool thing is dynamic data masking. So you can set up users for your SQL Server just like you can for regular SQL, right? And let's say you have your HR users, and then you have everybody else. Well, you want your HR users to be able to see the salary data for employees. So they say select star from employees in SQL Server Management Studio. Let's say they use that for some reason. The data comes back, they can see the salary, right? Now, if you have dynamic data masking turned on, you can make it so that anybody else that goes and does that select statement will only see hash marks in that column. So they won't see the salary, they'll just see pound signs down the column. And that is as low a level. If they go into SQL Server Management Studio, do a select, it'll bring all the data back, but the salary column is just going to be filled with. So last night I called them hashtags, and my son got mad. Dad, you're a programmer, it's pound signs. I don't know, they're the number thing, whatever. So that's what dynamic data masking is. So you can mask certain data from people that you don't want to see certain data, but you want them to be able to see other stuff. The user that's logging in, yeah.
So you have to actually pass through authentication.
It uses SQL Server authentication, or you can set up Azure AD as well. This is only on Azure SQL at this time, as far as I know. I don't think it's on on-prem SQL. Kind of a cool little feature. We were going to do a demo, but we are completely out of time, and I apologize. Let me just really quickly blow through a couple of the last things, because some of them are really cool. So one of the things is cognitive services. So AI is becoming more and more popular, right? Has anybody tried to do any machine learning stuff? Okay. In order to do machine learning, you have to have a PhD in data mining, whatever. It's not easy to set up a whole machine learning system, right? Azure provides you a lot of tools to do machine learning, where you can scrub your data and you can put it through tests. And anyway, it's a whole thing. What they do now is, with some of these cognitive services, they provide you some AI in a box. And it's not really in a box, but it's a RESTful service, right? So they have, for instance, the computer vision API, where you can send in picture, and it will send you back what is in that picture. Okay, this is a car driving down a road that's going to hit the car in front of you or something, I don't know. They have the Face API that can take a picture and see the faces and even do facial recognition. So I went down to a conference last year, and they did an example where they took a picture of Satya Nadella. Does everybody know who Satya Nadella is? He's the CEO of Microsoft. Anyway, and it could recognize him, and it could even recognize him from the side and from different poses. It was really, really pretty impressive. We also have the Bing Search API. So I know everybody likes to Bing everything all the time. You can dig right into the Bing Search API. Anyway, there's a lot of really cool APIs here, and I don't want to waste time on a demo because we're already out of time. But there is actually some cool demos. Okay, one more thing, well, a couple really quick, I apologize. Azure Functions. These are ways to do serverless operations in Azure that are really small, really quick, and really, really cheap. So if you have some things that just need to be done on a time basis or on an event basis, like let's say every time an image file gets put into this storage directory, I want to run the Cognitive Services Image API and stick a record in the database of everything that's in that image. Okay, let's say you want to do that. Well, you would do that with a function. It's a really small function, right? Maybe 20 lines of code or less. So you can put that function up in Azure. You can have it fire whenever a file gets put into this queue, and then write it to the database. The great thing about that is they are dirt cheap. They're based on what's called consumption-based billing, which means, so with an app service, you're being charged for however long that app service is running, right? Even if it's sitting there doing nothing, if nobody's coming to your website, you're still getting charged for that app service. With functions, you only get charged by execution. So every time that function is executed, that's when you get charged. And it's literally pennies to run a function. In fact, at that same conference, one of the Scots, I can't remember, I think it was Scott Hanselman, was talking about, they had a client that was implementing functions. And they got their bill from Microsoft one month, and they called up Microsoft and said, hey, I think we made a mistake. We ran this function over 1 billion times in a month, and we only got charged $40. And so Microsoft was like, well, okay, we need to look into this. This can't be right. They started looking into it. Sure enough, 1 billion executions of the function only cost them $40. So for things like that, functions are a very cost-effective way to operate. And you can build functions either in the portal itself. So if you go to the portal and build a function, you can actually write the source code, the code right there in the web browser as a C# IDE or Java, but a C# IDE right there in the web browser, or you can build it in Visual Studio and go through the whole publishing pipeline. So that's the last thing I wanted to talk about, and it's really unfortunate that I ran out of time, but Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps is a really easy way to set up continuous integration, continuous deployment into Azure. So you can set it up so that, as you commit things into your Git repo, your Azure DevOps will automatically build that. If it builds and passes all the tests, it will automatically publish it up to whatever deployment slot you want it to publish to. And so it's a true CI/CD pipeline all the way through. And then what happens is you put it into staging automatically as it passes through staging, as whoever decides to do it. You have gated releases to the next level. So you have a guy who is allowed to take it from staging to QA, and he's the only one that can go into Azure DevOps and do the swap from staging to QA. So you can gate all of the different deployments all the way up the line, so that you have somebody to blame when something is broken and it's not going to be deployed. And that's really what we're all about, right? Is pushing blame off of somebody else. So I have a really cool demo about that, but I've already taken up all my time. The last thing, and you see the wood over there, I was going to do this really cool demo about IoT. So Azure has a built-in IoT hub so that you can build, what does IoT stand for? Internet of Things, right? Everybody has Internet. I mean, Internet of Things is everywhere. There's billions of devices, and there's going to be billions more. Azure IoT Hub lets you manage all of those things and let you control them. And what I did is I built a blinds thing so that I can tell Google to open my blinds and it'll open the blinds. And that's all done, well, part of it is done in the Azure IT Hub. And I forgot the Arduino, which is a pretty important part of that, so I can't show that. So in conclusion, Azure is Microsoft's cloud platform, and we only touched on, I mean, almost nothing of what Azure can really do. Azure, like we saw, that list of services is huge. Visual Studio integrates really easily with Azure. And it's very easy to get up and running. There's a free trial, and it helps you become one of the universe. Now, I did want to mention, so one thing that STG is concentrating on for next year, I think most of you in here are STG employees except a couple of them, is we're working on creating some Azure certifications. Well, STG is working on creating some certifications. We're going to have an Angular one, we're going to have a React one. The first one that the .NET practice is going to do is going to be an Azure certification. And we're getting a lot of it done. We still have a little ways to go. But what we want is we want as many people as are interested, or as many people as can, to take this Azure certification. And what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to position STG as the Azure experts in the Valley. Right? We want STG to be the go-to Azure developers, Azure architects in the Valley. And hopefully by setting up this Azure certification and making sure that everybody can demonstrate their experience and their knowledge of Azure, we can do that. So be on the lookout for that. Quinn and Chad and Ron and I are working on putting that together. Turns out it's a lot of work to do that. Who would have guessed? But hopefully we'll be able to release it by the beginning of 2019. And so what I want to see is I am hoping that we get a lot of people who integrate that into their CDP and use that as the driver for their CDP. Because I would really like I said, Azure is getting bigger, Azure is growing, and I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for Azure, and I would really like a lot of people to get on board. So, yeah.
So for those who are STG employees, there was a process that hasn't worked real well for us to get those licenses to actually play.
Yeah.
Have we ironed out those wrinkles?
Not yet, but we're working on it. In fact, one of the things that I'm working on is, you know how you get reimbursed right now for Pluralsight? I'm trying to figure out a way to get reimbursed for some Azure credits. So you can have a monthly, your own Azure account, and then get some reimbursement for that.
Preloaded data products.
Exactly, something, we don't know yet, right? Because
we have your credit.
it wouldn't work very well. Here's the limit, here's where it's at, it's bumping up there.
You have that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and so what we're trying to figure out now is what's a reasonable monthly amount, right? Like I said, it's really easy to get out of control in Azure, and so, and that's a caution that I would give you, is because whatever STG decides, if you go over that, you're probably going to be responsible for that yourself. And even in SQL Server, you can get up to $3,000 to $4,000 a month just for a single database if you're not careful. Now, you'd have to be pretty clueless to do that, but it is possible. So we're working on that. By the time we debut the Azure certification, we should have all of that. Any other questions? Yeah.
What can you tell us about like the content of the Azure certification? What should we be studying right now?
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to do the Azure certification in multiple tiers. There's no way that we can do an Azure certification to cover all of that, right? It's just too big. So I'm going to do it in pieces. In the first piece, we're going to deal with app services. We're going to deal with Azure SQL. We're going to deal with storage accounts. We're going to deal with message queues. We're going to deal with Azure DevOps. What am I missing? Virtual machines. And depending on how big this gets, I may actually split even that one up, because we don't want this to take you 2 years to complete, because there's so much and it's so complex. Because, you know, we don't expect people to spend 3 or 4 hours a day doing this stuff, right? Everybody's busy and has their own lives, so we want to make it consumable enough that you can get it done, but meaningful enough that it means something. Right? And so that's kind of what we're trying to balance right now. But first, I want to kind of deal with the basics of Azure. And then level 2 will be things like Cosmos DB, Postgres SQL on Azure, Redis cache, things like that. And then level 3. So as we go up the levels, we'll get more and more detailed and more into Azure. And you can do whatever level you're comfortable with. If you don't care about Cosmos DB and Redis cache, then maybe you don't care about that one.
All those levels come out.
Oh no. First level will come out in January, and then the rest of them, it may take. One of the huge problems with Azure is it changes on a weekly basis. Right? You'll go in this week, and it's like, oh crap, where did that button go? Oh, it's a menu option now, or oh, there's this new feature. So Azure changes so fast that we're going to try to keep up with that, along with coming out with new certifications, and so it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So initially, we'll just have the one. Whatever that turns out to be, if we break out the one we've got or keep it together. Anybody else? Okay, well, I took way too much of your time. I appreciate it, and thank you.